Well, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to our March 9th, 2026 Connecticut IANDS meeting. And I am delighted to share that Dr. Robert Baer has joined us. He is a retired California Highway Patrol officer whose life was dramatically shifted when he had a near-death experience following a massive heart attack, 2 near-death experiences. And Robert is the vice president and founder of Spiritual Awakenings International. Robert, it is such a delight to have you here. You're an incredible contributor to the communities that you are a part of. And without further ado, I will hand the meeting over to you.
Thank you, Bethany. And it's such an honor to be in front of your group tonight. I appreciate the ability to talk to everybody. Thank you so much. I am Robert Baer. I'm actually joining you from Newport, Oregon, which is right on the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And tonight I'm going to talk about a couple of things that happened to me which changed my life totally. To set the stage, I had been a California highway patrolman for 23 years. Policeman, everything was black and white. Then I became a university professor. I was a city manager. I was an administrator of a Native American nation and an international business consultant. And I had a lot of power in my life. And quite frankly, I dealt with things kind of like in a black and white phase. I wasn't spiritual at all. I did grow up in an Irish Catholic household, so I have that background, and I have a Jesuit education. University of San Francisco is Jesuit. But this all started happening around 2008. I was having a talk on the telephone with a friend of mine, and we had been policemen together in the 60s and the 70s, and you know, you have a good friend when you start to talk with someone, even if you haven't talked to them for quite a while, and it seems like the conversation just continues from the last time you talked to them. And we were talking, catching up on everything, finding out who was still alive and so on and so forth. And he stopped and he said, I feel compelled to ask you a question. And I said, well, what's that? And he said, are you right with the Lord? And I said, hey, did you ask me that question? He says, I don't know. It just came out. And I said, well, I think I am. But then we just continued talking the way that we normally did. A short time later, a few weeks, I was asleep in my bed, and I woke up, and my mother had passed away in 2005. And I woke up and there was my mother at the foot of my bed. She was absolutely beautiful. She looked like she did when I was a little boy, and all in white. And she communicated with me, and I think it was telepathically. She told me that I was going to die and to get my affairs in order. I was so mad at myself because she disappeared, and I wished I could have told her how much I loved her and missed her, because you you only have one mother, and they're special. And I ended up, couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I was in like a pool of sweat. I called my father, who was still alive, and of course he wanted to know if she asked about him, and I said, no. This is exactly what she said. And I got to thinking about, I wonder if I need to take a physical, or I wonder if something's wrong with me health-wise because of my situation with my friend asking me that question and then my mother showing up. Well, a short time after I saw my mother, my friend passed away from a stroke. And it was devastating. I ended up helping I went down for a celebration of life, went down to California and took part in his eulogy. And I missed him I missed him. I still miss him today. But around March of 2009, I woke up in the middle of the night again, and there at the foot of my bed was my friend that had passed away. Same thing. He looked like he did when we were young, and he was happy. And he's communicated with me the same way. It had to be telepathically. He told me that he was going to bring me through the light. And I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I have to go. I want to go visit my grandchildren in Sacramento." He disappeared. I made some follow-up phone calls and found out that his grandchildren did live in Sacramento. I didn't know that. Well, I had a full physical where you have the treadmill and you have all the blood tests and urine tests and all that other stuff. Passed with flying colors, so I kind of put that in the back of my mind, and went to Arizona to spend a week with my son and my granddaughters. My son was a high school teacher at the time, and he had a spring break of a week. So I went down, and I was doing that quite often, going down, and we would go watch the spring training games for the various Major League Baseball teams. And we'd go to 2 or 3 games a day. And of course, my granddaughters, it was kind of a lot for them, but we dragged them along with us. And I didn't feel good the whole time I was there. And I thought, well, I'm from a coastal climate, and it seemed like it was about 100 degrees. It was real hot, and I just felt like I wasn't adapting very well. And I was looking forward to getting back to Oregon. And the day came where I was going to do that. My son dropped me off at the airport. We said our goodbyes, and I got in the airport in the terminal, and this TSA line it was so long, and I thought, I'm not feeling well. How am I going to make this? But I did. Made it through the TSA line, and I stopped at this little convenience store in the airport plaza, and I bought some aspirins and took them. And then I waited to have the flight called, and when the flight was called, I boarded the airplane, and as I was putting stuff in the overhead bin, I dropped dead from a massive heart attack. And I'm going to tell you, I don't remember anything. There were about dropping and being on the floor. There were 2 firemen from the Seattle area on the plane and a doctor who knew how to work a defibrillator, and they started to work on me immediately. But I don't remember a thing about that. I gravitated into a light, and there was something with me or somebody with me, and I like to think it was my friend, because if he told me he was going to do something, we'd been friends for over 50 years. I knew he would do it. But I started gravitating into a light, and all of a sudden I saw colors magnificent. They're not from this earth. They're totally different colors. And it was so warm and so loving. It was just a phenomenal experience. And then I ended up in the front of a higher power, and it was so humbling. I could not look at the higher power. I was like in an auditorium, but it wasn't an auditorium. There was like souls all over. I didn't know the significance of this, but I knew something was going to happen. And I just heard the higher power who talked to me, and it had to be telepathically. And the one thing I remember was that I was asked what good I had done in my life. And all of a sudden, to my left, I started the life review from the day I was conceived until the day that I died. And the life review was phenomenal. I mean, I had to live through all the things that I had gone through before in my life. And the unusual thing was I could also feel and understand what the people I was interacting with felt. about me personally. And when you have a lot of power like I did in my life, whether it's being a policeman or a city manager or university professor where you grade people, fail them or whatever, I didn't realize the impact I had on people. It was a reckoning for me. And I was watching these things unfold, and something was fidgeting off on my right, and I looked over there, and there was my dog Scooter that had died in 2001. She was there. It was phenomenal. It was so good to see her. I didn't even know that I would be in a dimension like I was, and I didn't know that there would be souls, and then there'd be our animals that we had. But there she was. She couldn't come to me, but she was there, and she was excited that I was there. Well, I saw all the things play out. I mean, I got to live all the good times, all the bad times, nothing but truth. That's all there is in this dimension, truth. And it is blunt, and it's shocking, and it's emotional too. But I saw myself, for example, I was a young boy, and we used to go shopping on Saturday mornings. My father would load everybody up on a station wagon, and of course there were no seat belts. All the kids, we were running all over, going back and forth from one seat to the other. And we go to a store, and I was probably 5 or 6 years old, and I figured out the dynamics of the family by that time. I knew if I asked my father for something, I would probably get it, but if I asked my mother, I wouldn't get it. So I kind of knew how to play the game at that time, and I saw these baseball cards, and I wanted them real bad. And I asked my dad if I could have the baseball cards, and my mother overheard me say this, and she goes, "You don't need those baseball cards. No, you can't have them." And my father, I think, was going to tell me, "Yeah, just go ahead," because I think they were a nickel. But they kind of walked off, and I stole the baseball cards. We got home. I went into my bedroom. I started to unwrap the baseball card package, and there was like a stick chewing gum in there, and they were like wrapped in a wax paper. And just when I started to eat the bubble gum that was in there, my mother opened the door, and she said, "Robert, where'd you get that?" And of course I lied. I said I had it before. And she said, "This is unacceptable in our family." She got my father. They loaded me up in a car, took me back to the store, and made me apologize to the manager of the store. And I remember my mother saying, "This is unacceptable in our family. If you want to call the police, take him to jail. We don't care. He needs to learn a lesson from this." And that had a profound effect on my life. The store, I could read the mind of the store manager. He was like, "Oh, come on." And he finally said to my father, "Just give me a nickel and take your son home and ground him or do something." So they did. And that was a profound lesson in my life, because I never considered stealing anything ever again. I got caught. And I did realize a lot of the lessons I learned were from things that I had done wrong. But there were other things. There was a young lady that I had kind of went out with. I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, which is a beach town, and my friends and we had I had a 56 Chevy, 57 Chevy, an old wood paneled station wagon. I had all these old vehicles, and on the weekends we used to like cruising on Beach Street, and then we'd find somebody to go drag racing with, and we'd go up the North Coast, and it was kind of like being a hooligan, but it wasn't. I mean, these were driving things, but this one lady came up to me, somebody from school, and she said, Robert, there's a dance at the Coconut Grove. Let's go. Can you take me? And I said, no. And she said, why not? And I said, because I have other plans. And she says, well, what are your other plans? And I said, I'm going cruising with my friends. And she said, well, can I go with you? And I said, no, we don't take girls with us. I said, it wouldn't be good for you. And she got mad, stormed off. And then she came back. I was working on my car and she had this letter and she threw it at me. That night, there were four people, all friends of mine, and she was one of them, that were in an accident in the Santa Cruz area that hit a tree at about probably 70 miles an hour, and she died in the accident. And when I saw this part of my life review, I heard a voice say, "You never opened my letter." I knew who that was. And she's right. I never did. I still have the letter. It's in my storage. And I know what was in the letter. It had something to do with my character, probably. But I just never opened it. But what happened in the life review where people were able to interject things. And another thing that happened, there was an accident up in the mountains, and I was a watch commander at the time, or shift supervisor, and I was called to go up there. A car had apparently gone over the embankment and caught on fire. So I went up there, and there were a couple of our officers there that were investigating it. And I came up to take pictures and see what had happened. And they were able to bring the car up. And when they brought the car up, there was the charred remains of a deceased person that was laying across the seat. It was like a bench seat with their arms like this, folded. And I looked at that and I told the guys that I worked with, I said, I've seen quite a few people that burned to death in car accidents, and they seem to be like in the fetal position. I never saw one that was like that. And I thought, well, maybe this has been a homicide. So I called the sheriff's department. They came up there, and I said, this is unusual. You may want to take a look at this. And they said, oh no, it's an accident. Just you handle it. And the coroner asked me if I'd go notify. We found out who the young person was. If I would go notify the deceased family to tell them what had happened. And I said, I can do that. So I drove to the home, and I went up this dirt road. And I went up the dirt road in a patrol car, and the lights came on. And I parked the car. I got out of the car and started to walk up to the house. And I heard this woman scream. And so I knocked on the door, and she opened the door. And she says, "You're here to tell me that my son died." And I told her, I said, I can't lie to you. Is there someone here that could be here while I talk to you? And she goes, "No, there's just me." And so she just broke down, and I kind of put my arms around her, and I said, "Let's sit down." And I told her what I knew. And I said, "He's going to be going down to the county morgue." She says, "I have no way of getting there. That was their car." And I said, "Is there somebody I can call or whatever?" And she goes, "No." And I said, "Well, if you need something, I'll be glad to help you." And get you down there. But as this was going along in my life review, I heard a voice say, "Thank you for what you did for my mother." That had to be that young man that passed away. And not only that, um, it ended up when they did an autopsy on the young man, where he had his arms crossed, there were actually bullet slugs in his chest cavity. So it was a murder. So that actually transpired. And as a policeman, I worked some pretty major areas. I worked in the Watts, South Central Los Angeles area, right after the riots. And actually, they were still actually going on when I was there. East Los Angeles, San Francisco twice, Oakland twice, Santa Cruz twice. I worked some pretty major metropolitan areas and where a lot of things happened. And when I was down in the Watts area, it was like a war zone. I mean, you would be working your shift at night, and they doubled us up at night. It used to be there was just one officer per car, but then they started to double for safety. They put two of you in a car. And you could hear gunshots going off, and I mean, it was like a war zone. And one night I was with my partner, and we stopped a car that it was weaving all over the road, so we didn't want to see it get in a wreck, and we thought we had a definite person that was driving under the influence. So we pulled him over, and he actually went to an alley behind an apartment complex. And that particular location, when you got out, it wouldn't be unusual to look up and you see rifles pointing at you and stuff. I mean, it was so intense. That's how it was back in those days. And we didn't have things like bulletproof vests or we didn't even have handheld radios or anything. We didn't even have a public address system that hadn't been invented yet. Motorola came up with that probably around 1970, 71 or 72 were the first time I remember those. But we had the young guy, we had the man out. We had just hooked him up and was putting him in the back seat of the car and in the cage area. And I heard some gunshots go off, and even he says, those are right by us. This is the guy we arrested. And I looked up, and there was a guy running at us with a gun, with a rifle. And I yelled at him to halt. He didn't halt, and I could have drawn down on him and probably been justified to shoot him, but something told me not to do it. He came up, and he said he had just been robbed, and he had fired some warning shots. And when I was watching that part of my life review, I actually heard someone say, "Thank you for not shooting me." This actually came from this, for lack of a better terms, this auditorium or audience. That had to be that person. So I lived my entire life over, and I'm looking at my time. I got about 15 more minutes. I lived that time period over, and the hardest thing I had to deal with when I came back and when I was revived, and I was deceased for about 45 minutes for the initial heart attack. It was incredible. I had a doctor that would not let me die. And the hardest thing I've had to deal with is betrayal. And if you've ever been through a divorced situation or had anything like that happen in your life, sometimes it's almost better if you don't know what happened. But when I had my life review, I did see what happened. And my daughter, who's an attorney, had cancer, and her mom and I had divorced quite some time ago. We hadn't spoken to each other in years, and it was a highly contested divorce, and she'd been remarried and everything, and her current husband or new husband hated me for some reason. I don't know why, but that was the case. And we went up to to the hospital while the surgery was going on for my daughter, and we were in a surgery waiting room, and it was an ugly situation. He finally got up to go use the restroom, and I told my former wife, I said, we have a daughter that has cancer, and after all these years, she might need both her mom and her dad. Why don't we just bury the hatchet and just move on? And I said, can you get him to move on? And she goes, I don't know. I says, well, it's very uncomfortable. So she says, well, I guess we can. And she says, is there anything that you want to tell me? And I said, there's something I want to ask you. I said, you know that I passed away and was revived? And she goes, yes. And I had a life review, and she goes, yes. And I said, well, there was a situation in there that dealt with betrayal. And I just said, whatever happened, happened. But in my mind, can you tell me whether or not this actually occurred the way that it did? And she says, well, what was it? So I told her, and she said, yes, that happened. So that validated what I had seen in my life review. But getting back to being deceased for 45 minutes, I was in a hospital. I was revived, and I was alive for a few minutes, and then I passed away again. And when I passed away this time, I actually hovered over the bed, and I actually saw them working on me. They were frantically working on me, and I saw a digital readout which showed that I had flatlined. I saw it. It was in green. I was watching them work on me, and then all of a sudden my attention was drawn to another part of the hospital where they were going through my personal things that came in with the ambulance, probably trying to find out who the hell I was. So my attention was drawn to that situation. So I was watching them go through my stuff. And a lot of policemen, we carry two wallets. One has our police ID in it. We have another one that has like your Social Security card and stuff like that, maybe pictures of your kids or whatever. And they were trying to find my insurance cards. And I was trying to tell them where my insurance cards were. Well, I realized they couldn't hear me. And I thought, I must be dead. And I was watching them go through and interact. Finally, they opened up my police ID and said, whoa, this guy's retired police. This is him. And soon after that, I ended up back in my body, revived again. And I mean, it was an experience I wouldn't wish on anybody. I had so many machines hooked up to me. I had flailed chest. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't swallow or breathe. I still had that thing stuck down my throat. I had all these tubes and needles in me and stuff, and they put me up in an intensive ward for cardiac emergencies, and I was in there. And the doctor would come in, and he was really a great man. He was from Pakistan, just a great guy, and he would talk to me all the time. And I think probably he was trying to check my cognitive ability. I'm sure that was part of it, but I think he genuinely liked talking to me. And I knew a lot about his life. His parents were in Pakistan. He was worried about them, wanted to go back to Pakistan, try and get them back to the United States. And I knew all this stuff because he'd come in and talk to me. And one day he said, you know, you coded out. And that was the words that he used, coded out. And I said, I think I know what you're talking about. And I said, yes, I do. He said, you remember anything from that? And I said, I do. And he said, well, what do you remember? And I gave him the example of being in the hospital and watching him go through my stuff. And he said, you mean our admissions office? And I said, if that's what it was, yeah. I said, it was pretty close to the emergency room where I was, but I said, there were two people working there, and I described them. He says, you remember them in detail? And I said, I just told you what I saw. And so he went to admissions and found out who the two people were. And when they worked again, he brought them to my bedside. And he goes, you recognize these people? And I said, yeah. I said, those are the people that were going through my stuff. And they were kind of smiling. And he says, can you tell them what you told me? And I did. And both of them looked at each other and said, that is exactly what happened, word for word. So that experience, that near-death experience was validated. And I am so grateful that that occurred, because you know that it's not, you're not crazy or whatever. And I never did think I was crazy. I lived this. And so I was hooked up to all these machines. I wanted to go home really, really bad. And I told them, I was trying to stay alive so I could see my kids and my grandkids. I really was trying really hard for that. That was important to me. And whatever happened after that, I accepted that would be my fate. And lo and behold, I started to get better. And I wanted to get out of there. And I told the doctor, I said, I would really like to go back home to Oregon. And I said, I don't know if I ever want to go to Phoenix ever again in my life. And he goes, well, he says, you need one more surgery. And I said, I want to go home. And I said, I really don't care what, put me on a plane if you can. And he says, well, I have a colleague in Oregon that I'll call and see if he can do the procedure. But he says, if I put you on a plane, you have to promise me as soon as you get off the plane, you'll have the procedure. I said, okay, I'll do it. So that happened. I flew to Oregon, and I didn't know if I was going to make it or not. In the back of my mind, I thought, I hope I can make it. And I also had high anxiety from being on an airplane because I had died on an airplane. So, I mean, I had that to contend with. And I made it to Portland. From Portland, I made it to a hospital down in the Eugene area. And I went in for surgery and I had that surgery. And I was in a surgery recovery room, and it was storming really bad outside. Of course, it's Oregon weather. It was like raining sideways. I could hear the wind and I could hear the rain hitting the windows, and I had all this things hooked up to me from the surgery. They were still giving me some fluids and stuff, and I looked over to the left, and there was this old Catholic nun there. And for some reason I said, am I dead? And she goes, no, you're not dead. She says, you're in a recovery room. And I said, well, why are you here? And she goes, I'm praying for you. I said, well, thank you so much. And she was so nice. And she said, I have been a nun, or she said a sister, her whole adult life. And she said, I heard that you were deceased for quite a while and were revived. I said, well, who'd you hear that from? And she goes, well, it's all over the hospital. You're just like Lazarus. And I said, I'm not my class. I said, I'm just an average white man. And I said, I'm just trying to get through the surgery. And I said, I hope to get home eventually. And she says, do you remember what happened to you when you died? And I said, I do. And she says, well, can you tell me what you remember? And I said, not now. I said, I think I'm going to be here for a few days. And she says, you will. And I said, if you come back and see me, we'll have a talk. And she says, I will. So she did come back. And I've told two people what I remember. And and that's how I'm going to start my book. I've actually started a book where I'm in the surgery recovery room, and here's this nun, and I'm telling her the story, and I'm going to lay out all the things that happened that I told her, the events of two near-death experiences on the same day, totally different, totally opposite. Someone who was not a believer, and all of a sudden I am one spiritual human being. It just got me. And I wanted to say one more thing. I know I have 2 more minutes, I guess, before my time's up. My father, I was visiting my father. He died when he was 97. But I was telling him about this experience, and I told him about seeing him and my mother. The first things I remembered from my life review. And he says, well, what do you remember? And I said, I remember seeing her in a plaid skirt, and there was an old car. And I said, because I'm an old highway patrolman, I noticed the car was a Chevrolet. I saw Chevrolet's thing on there. He goes, really? And I said, yes. He says, well, what color was it? I said, it was black. So he excused himself. He went, took out a box and started to go through it and pulled out a picture. And there was a picture of him and my mother smiling in front of a Chevrolet. He says, is that what you saw? I said, yeah. I said, there's the plaid skirt. I said, there's you, and I said, this is exactly what I saw. He goes, that was one of the best days of your mother's life. I said, why is that? And he goes, we were outside the doctor's office, and she found out she was pregnant with you. I was the oldest. And we went down and got married. I said, you mean I was a love child? And he goes, yeah, but she never, don't ever tell anybody else. I said, well, it doesn't make any difference. I said, and he says, yeah, that's what happened. But that validated what I had actually seen at the very beginning when I said my life review started when I was conceived. That actually happened. And I want to say one other thing with my last minute here. I passed away in 2009, about the same time that Michael Jackson did, the rock star. And they took him to a doctor at the UC Medical Center in Los Angeles that was renowned for raising the dead. He'd been deceased about 45 minutes, the same amount of time that I'd been deceased, and they couldn't revive him. And I've often thought, I wonder what Michael Jackson would have given to have the extension of life, because I've had, and every day I count it, 6,196 extra days of life right now. I'm so grateful. I love my life. I love living. My whole life has changed. The way I look at life, the way I treat people. I started grant writing and doing things for homeless shelters and disabled veterans, and used my skills to do things like that. And I wished I had done that years and years ago. The other thing that happened, I had been vice president of IANDS for a while with Yvonne Cason, who was president. And I had a download one day that I was to do something else. And I called her up. We talked on the phone, and I said, Yvonne, I think I'm supposed to be doing something else. I think you're supposed to do it with me. She says, what's that? And I told her about this. That's I call them a download. You get this just like a message or whatever. And I told her, I said, I think we're supposed to be doing something else. And she goes, well, I don't know about that. And I said, well, think about it. A couple of days later, she called me and she said she had the same download. And so I'm 72 years old. I have to be crazy. But I said, I'm going to quit, resign from IANDS, and I'm going to start that other organization. So she resigned also as president. She resigned as president. I resigned as vice president. And Linda Truax, who'd been secretary, left and joined us. And we created Spiritual Awakenings International, which is, to me, it's a gift to the world as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I'm not being selfish in saying that. We deal with all types of spiritual transformative experiences. We have a great program. It's not just in near-death experiences. It encompasses everything. And we are now, in 5 years, we're in 114 countries. And Dr. Bethany Silver is part of our organization now. And we work together, her and I. And I'm just so happy. And I look at myself like, you know, back in the days of Marco Polo and some of the other Christopher Columbus, Mark Twain, some of the other people that went out and had adventures, and then they came back and they had to do their presentations without pictures, without digital recordings or whatever, which is what our society is used to now. They just got up and made their presentations. Marco Polo ended up talking to the Queen. He got to go on another excursion. Same thing with Christopher Columbus. Mark Twain would go to San Francisco, talk about being in India, and he'd have 6 people there for one talk, and next thing you know, it'd be packed as he kept talking. I look at my life as very similar to that, because I really don't care what people think. I'm going to tell the truth. I just get up. I've talked all over the world, television shows. I'm probably an A-lister type speaker now. And it's such an honor to speak to every group and to your group also. And I want to end it with this. I know that I've gone a couple moments over, but what you do in life matters. And you have to live your life every day like it's just enjoy your time on earth and try and do good. Life is really an adventure. Enjoy your ride. And Dr. Silver, I'm going to give it right back to you. I hope I didn't take up too much of your time. Thank you.
That was perfect, Robert. Thank you so much. You really hit it out of the park with your story.
Oh.
So fabulous. It was what a fascinating experience you've had. And I'm going to open the floor for questions. So people use the raised hand function if you have a question for Robert. But what an incredible experience, Robert. And so appreciate you sharing with our group. I do have a question to kick us off. And that would be, I'm curious to know what kinds of integration, what your integration experience was like, and how you may have, like, when you put your life back on after you passed away and you walked out of that hospital and you went and you had your 3rd surgery, and it was, you know, when you stepped back into your life, like, how did you experience that life? And were there any things that you did to integrate spirituality or integrate your spiritually transformative experience after your NDE?
Thank you for asking that question, because I did not want to even talk about what happened to me. I couldn't talk to my police friends. They would have thought I was crazy. I couldn't talk to anybody. And it's not a secret that people that have near-death experiences, if they had been married, for example, at the time that they experienced it, it caused a division between them and their spouse, and maybe they broke up as a result. And I also realized that people that talk like I'm talking right now, it wasn't that long ago, they probably would have burned me at the stake for saying what I'm saying. And but I was listening to a talk show one night, driving home from California. I visited my father, and I was driving back to Oregon, and there was nothing on the radio that I wanted. I got tired of listening to classic rock, and I hit this talk show called Coast to Coast, which I've been on, by the way, and I since. But I was listening to this panel of people that were assembled to talk about what happens to you when you die. And I listened to them talk, and none of them had been someone that had experienced an NDE. And what they said was totally different than what I experienced. And I thought about that, and I thought, this is a shame. There's got to be a way to get the word out. And shortly after, I was on YouTube, and on the sidebar of YouTube, they have like other videos that you can watch. And one popped up that said, George Harrison's last interview. Well, I was a big Beatles fan. In fact, I went to the last Beatles concert in Candlestick Park in San Francisco in 1966. I was there. And I clicked on that. And there was George Harrison, who talked about having fame, wealth, women, no matter what it was. And he said, I should have been concerned about what's going to happen to me when I die. All of a sudden, it was coming to the end of the line, which is one of the songs that him and the Traveling Wilburys had done. It wasn't as a result of this, but I think probably that had a bearing on what he was talking about. And if you want to get on YouTube and watch that, if you just watch the first 5 minutes, you're gonna see what I'm talking about. But I listened to that, and I thought, this has nothing to do with somebody's status in life, or somebody that no matter what they've done, and we're all going to go through the same thing. And lo and behold, I still don't know how this happened, but I got contacted by a television show called I Survived Beyond and Back. It was a show that was from New Zealand. And they had wanted to interview me for the show. And I was very reluctant. I think I know how this happened, because I was but I'm not sure. They never gave me an answer. But I was Deborah Diamond wrote a book about near-death experiences, and had examples of people, and I was one of the 5 examples she wrote about. And I had problems where when I was talking to her on Zoom, not Zoom, it was Skype, I blew out the screen. My electronic field blew out the screen. And I have a lot of problems with some of the after effects that's happened to me. And so I got this contact, and she called me and she said, "Could you fly to New York, and we'd like to interview you. We'll get you a ticket." And I said, "I'm not interested." And she says, "Well, we really would like to interview you." And I said, "The problem I have is I died on an airplane, and I have this phobia about getting on an airplane." So I said, "Thank you, but no thank you." 2 days later, she called and she said, "How about Washington, D.C.?" And I said, "No, not going to go there. They're going to interview somebody from there." And then a couple of days later, Los Angeles. And I said, "No." She says, "Well, how can we interview you?" And I said, "Well, why don't you come to Oregon?" And she goes, "No, we're not going to go to Oregon." I said, "Well, that's the way it is." And she says, "Well, do you get down to the Bay Area?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "As a matter of fact, I'm going down there. My father, he's in his late 90s. I'm going to go visit him. I give my sister a respite break because she's been taking care of him. And I give her a couple of days. I take him, and then she gets to go have some time off." And she says, "Well, what if I set up something down there?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." So she got a television studio, and I went down and I interviewed for the show. Didn't think anything of it. Her and I went and had dinner after the interview, and I said, "I've never read a book. I've never seen anything at the time. I had never seen anything, any documentaries or something." I said, "What I said, did that vary from what other people have told you?" And she goes, "No, not really." She says, "I I just want you to know that you really have a great story to tell." And I said, "Well, it's the truth." And I thought nothing of this. Um, I never heard back from her. I was going down I-5 to go to Phoenix, Arizona, and I was going to take a vehicle that I had to my son who wanted to use it for his business. And so I stopped in his truck stop and got gas, and had to use the restroom. So I went into the restroom, and as I was going to the restroom, there was this big wide open area with a bunch of truck drivers in there. And this was on a Super Bowl Sunday. So I thought, oh, they must be listening to the Super Bowl or something. But they all started to look at me. And I looked back, and then I walked into the restroom, and I'm in there, and this guy follows me in there, and he goes, "You're the guy that was the policeman and saw your dog." I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "We just watched you last night on television, and we were just talking about you." I said, "Really?" Because I did not know that show had aired. And all of a sudden, I realized, well, it's amazing. But they asked me if I'd stop by and talk to them, and I said, "Sure." So I stopped in, and people wanted pictures with me and stuff, and I had no idea that this was going to happen. And I thanked everybody, and I thought, well, I better go see that show because I don't know what they actually put out on television. So I go down, and I stopped at an In-N-Out Burger, and my cardiologist would have been mad at me, but I saw an In-N-Out Burger, and I used to frequent that when I worked in Los Angeles. And I went into an In-N-Out Burger, and I saw a couple of police cars there, and I went up to order a double animal style, which is my favorite. And this police lady comes up to me, and she goes, "You're the guy that was on the television show. We were just talking about you." I said, "I guess that's a rumor." And she said, "Would you join us?" And I said, "Sure." So I joined them. And all of a sudden, I realized that there's a movement that's not with the traditional religious experience like Catholic and Lutheran Presbyterian. It's people that are truck drivers that get their stuff on satellite radio, or they watch stuff on the internet. It's a whole movement, and I think Spiritual Awakenings International has tapped into that movement, which is why we're in 114 countries around the world. And I think I talked too long, Bethany. I'm sorry. That's the old professor in me. I apologize, everybody. You probably have more questions. I hope I answered your question, by the way.
Well, you answered it, and you added such great detail. I love the story about the truck stop and people recognizing you. And of course, that must have been difficult, not knowing that your story had been
It was.
was on TV. But people do have questions, and appreciate so much, Robert, your sharing. Tina, go ahead.
Hi, Robert. I really appreciate your clarity. It was wonderful. Your sharing was absolutely wonderful. I want to ask you, because I had my last near-death experience in 2012 when I died at a car crash. And since then, I still receive information. It did not stop there. So many times when I wake up in the morning, I get information about certain people, and the clarity is just unbelievable. And I also know when to give the information to people and when not. When I'm supposed to give information to people, it's like a broken record in my head. And so right after I give it, then it goes away. I'm wondering if you've had similar situations.
Yes, and Dr. Kason and I call those downloads. And that is one of the characteristics that can happen as a result of a near-death experience. And I was a little intimidated by those at first, but now I look at them as a blessing. And I think you're blessed, Tina. I do. And you're especially blessed if you were revived and brought back to life. But your answer is yes.
Well, thank you for
that. Was a great question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tina, for your question. I'm going to go to Kevin now. Kevin, go ahead.
Hi, Robert. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It's interesting you mentioned coast to coast, because after my second NDE, I went through the same thing for 10 years. I knew what had happened, but I couldn't tell anyone about it. And it was actually listening to Art Bell in the middle of the night, with people calling in and saying, this happened to me, that made me realize, I had always known it had happened, but in a way I didn't believe it. I don't know if that makes sense to you. But I was just wondering, since then, I've had precognitions. I mean, not deja vu where it's already happened, but kind of knowing something's going to happen before it happens. And then it happens, and the hair on the back of my neck just stands up. It hasn't happened a lot, but I'm just wondering if you run into that, and what your overall thought on time is. Because in my first NDE, I learned that time really, at least as far as I'm concerned, doesn't really exist the way we think it does. It's not a linear thing that we kind of go through, as well as, I think that we're not bodies, we're souls in bodies, and we really don't understand everything. I don't think our human brain can understand everything that we are involved in and what life really is. But I was wondering, if you've had similar experiences with precognitions, and what your thoughts on time and eternity are.
I'm going to answer it this way. Where I was for my life review I've been asked like, well, how long did that take? 10 minutes, or did it take 5 minutes, or did it take 30 minutes? There's no concept in time. You are exactly right. That's the perception I have. You are spot on, Kevin. Premonitions, I get them. And what's really interesting is I had them before my near-death experiences. And I need to bring up, this happened to me well within the last year. I was driving on the Coast Highway and something told me to pull over. And I listen to things. I pulled over and there was a curve. And if I hadn't pulled over, there was a logging truck on the wrong side of the road coming around the curve. If I had stayed in that lane and not paid attention to my premonition or what happened, I would have been hit head on and I wouldn't be talking to you right now. You're not crazy. I think it's a gift, Kevin. And I hope I answered your question. It's unique, but I would also like to encourage everybody. I know I was involved with IANDS and the initial ISGO program. And then when I broke off and I went to Spiritual Awakenings International, we started what's called sharing circles, sharing groups. And in fact, we just had one last weekend. And these groups, which we've had usually at least one weekend a month or one Saturday of the month, people from all over the world come to them and they share very similar things to what you just shared, Kevin. And I think you would be surprised at some of the things you would hear that come out. And I'm one of the facilitators, and one of the groups that I facilitated, there was somebody from Norway, somebody from Ireland, somebody from Great Britain, somebody from Japan, somebody from Australia, somebody from South America. I was the only American, somebody from Canada also. And so you get perceptions from all over the world. And that's what we tried to do with Spiritual Awakenings International, was to bring us together. All the STE community to share circumstances and to realize that we're not crazy. We all of us that talk have some very good experiences. So thank you for bringing that out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. And thank you for bringing that up. IANDS has regular sharing meetings, and also Spiritual Awakenings International has them on I think the first Saturday of the month, and on the third Saturday of the month is a speaker. And I'm just going to put the link in the chat for SAI so that you can sign up. There is no charge. Of course, if you can donate a few dollars, that's always appreciated because it's a large organization and it runs on donations. But there are some really wonderful resources and great sharing groups to go to talk about spiritually transformative experiences. And it's really beautiful. I've been to a number of them. I can't always go, but I really enjoy them. The work that SAI is doing. The speakers, too, are phenomenal. Last month was, oh gosh, I just closed the page, too. But Ann Archer Butcher.
Yeah.
Yes. Wanted to get the whole name. Ann Archer Butcher. What an incredible experience Ann shared. And she's also a longtime member of SAI. But Robert, I have another question. I don't see any hands, and we have until 8:30. So, but I'm just wondering, What do you think is like the number one lesson for you from your near-death experience?
I'm going to be very, very honest in saying that for me, it's how I treat people because of what I saw in my life review, and what I perceived other people to think of me. I don't think I was that bad, but I didn't like some of the things that I saw, and I could have done things differently. And I know one thing: I will never be the boss again. I don't want to be a city manager or professor again. Even though I've been in the University of Oregon, I was in their faculty pool for a while. I would have never taken a full-time position. I would have like filled in for a few sessions or whatever. But I have no desire to do that. And I wanted to say one other thing, that I've been talking a lot about angel encounters. And I don't know if your group has ever experienced that, but during my life review, I did experience that. And I have just one thing to say, and this happened to me in the 90s. I was on a flight from Denver to Texas, Houston, Texas. I was actually living on Padre Island at the time, and it was a red-eye flight. And red-eye flights, a lot of times people sleep on the flight, so I mean, it's a late night thing. And I was sitting in an aisle seat. There was no one next to me, but there was somebody in a window seat, and we were getting to land. And the guy from the window seat turned around and looked at me, and he had these, I'll never forget his eyes. They were striking. And he said, "Do you read the Bible?" And I said, "Why are you asking me that question?" He says, "Well, I just was curious." And I said, "Well, I've read it in the past." And he says, "Well, read Matthew 18:18. So I said, "Okay." So we landed. I got to thinking about this, and I thought, what's this all about? So this was before I had an NDE, by the way. So I got off the plane and I went into the area where everybody disembarks, and I was waiting for him to come off the plane. And I waited, and there was nobody coming off the plane that looked like him. So I asked the people at the desk. I said, "Is this a continuation flight?" And they said, "No, this is the end of the line." And I said, "Well, I was sitting with somebody, and I didn't see him come off." And she says, "No, everybody's gone. Everybody's off the plane." So I thought nothing of it. So I thought, well, that's strange. So this was a Friday night, Saturday morning. And on Sunday, I thought, well, I'm going to go to church today. So, and I didn't know what church to go to, but I decided to go to a church in Corpus Christi that I heard had great music. And I play horns, so I thought that'd be kind of fun to go to a church that had good music. So I went there. I was the only white person in that church, and I sat in the back row. And that's neither here nor there, but that actually happened. And the choir and the music was phenomenal. It was like being at a Motown review. It was really neat. And the pastor got up and he goes, I was going to talk about such and such today. And I was shaving, and all of a sudden I got this premonition, which to me meant he had a download, to talk about Matthew 18:18. That's what I was asked on the airplane if I'd read that, and I hadn't read it. So he gave a sermon on Matthew 18:18, and it hit so home to me. It was just like he was speaking to me. So at the end of the service, he would thank everybody for coming. He'd get out the door, thank everybody, and then invite them over for a potluck in another room, like a cafeteria area of the church. And I waited till the end, and I walked up to him and I told him what had happened. I'd been on the airplane, and this had happened, and he just started to cry. And he said, "Who are you?" And I said, "I'm just an average white man. That's all I am. But thank you for the message." And he says, "That message was for you." And I said, "Well, it sure hit home." And I said, "Thank you so much for it." But as I saw in my life review, pay attention in your life to circumstances and things, because there are angels among us. There are. And I just wanted to add that. And I talk about that now. That's one of the things that I'm starting to talk about. Some angel encounters. Some have been lucky enough to have somebody with me that's witnessed them. And I probably ran out my time, or is there any more time left? I'm sorry to deviate so much.
No, I think these are fascinating stories.
Sure.
These are great stories, and we have people with questions. So we'll go till 8:30 and stop the recording, and then people are welcome to just hang out and chat. So, but Tina, you have your hand up, and then Lori, go ahead.
Hi, Robert. The book that I wrote about 6 years ago, it took me 10 years to write. And my granddaughter at the time, she was 4 years old, and she gave me the title of the book. She said that the angels had given her that name. We Are Angels is the title. Okay, so, and I've seen one. Yes.
That's awesome.
Very much so. We'll talk. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Tina. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. So many lessons. I keep rereading it, and there are so many lessons in it. So thank you, Tina, for writing your book. And Robert, I look forward to your book as well.
Don't hold your breath. I just keep working. That's a problem.
Lori has her hand up. Go ahead, Lori.
Hi, Robert. I'd like to thank you for sharing your experience with our group. It really hit close to home. My NDE was from toxic mold exposure in my home in 2017. But recently, I flew to my sister's in North Carolina, and I believe I was having a heart attack. I had had some symptoms and some surgery prior to that. But I had her drop me off at the airport. She dropped me off at the wrong terminal. I walked to the right terminal, and I was probably having a heart attack, but I took nitro and I took aspirin, and I got on the plane, and I knew I had 1 minute before that door closed to change my mind. But I wanted to get home to my heart doctor and the hospitals here, and by the grace of God, I was able to get back here, but nobody would help me or believe me for a long time. So recently, I had another procedure. I have a total of 6 stents in my heart, 1 in my neck and 1 in my stomach, and I still don't feel well. And I look back at my near-death experience, and I didn't have a life review or anything. I just went to the black void, but I knew I wasn't on Earth. And your experience, I'm so happy about the way you've changed to listen to others, to help others, and to create your group, which I'm going to definitely check that out, because I feel like in the time from my NDE until my recent experiences, I didn't change a lot. I changed spiritually. I believe that everything is truly possible. And more recently, I followed the Monks Walk for Peace, and every day I write, as they have asked, today is going to be my peaceful day. And I practice with those around me to be, and I find it helping to be a much calmer person. It's interesting because this monk has ignited a fire of hope in a lot of people, and I think that you and your organization are probably doing that as well. And I appreciate that you are bringing this internationally around the world. And I'm surprised I hadn't heard of your organization, but I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. And my question was, do you have any residual physical effects from that experience when you died? Thank you.
Yes, I have issues. I'll put it that way. I set off microwaves sometimes. There's one store, local store, that when I leave, the alarm goes off. In fact, if they see me, they know that it's going to go off. TSA, I set those things off when I go through the line. I've been blessed with having the opportunity to, sometimes I know something's going to happen. I sit down in a recliner, give myself something to drink, and all of a sudden I can see the colors that I saw before all over again. And to me, it's something I look forward to. I have trouble sleeping, which is not uncommon for those of us that have had NDEs. Same thing with waking up. We go to sleep, we wake up at 3 o'clock. It seems to be a common theme. And
It's 3 o'clock.
I never told anybody that I had worked with about what had happened to me. They've seen me on television or something, then they call and they want to talk about it. And I tell them, I don't think you would have believed me at the time. And I encourage them to listen to other people talk too. And for example, there's not just one type of NDE, near-death experience. I had 2 different types on the same day. One was the life review. The other was gravitating over the bed in the emergency room. So I had 2 different types. And I actually had another type, which I haven't talked about. We don't have time today. When I was bleeding out from a bleeding ulcer, I had another type, and which happened a few years ago. So every day is just a gift. And really, when you look at it, everything's small stuff. It really, I mean, if you get a ticket by the police, small stuff. I mean, you get, somebody cuts in front of you in a line, that's small stuff. There's no reason to get all worked up about stuff. My children would tell you they like me more now than they did before. They tell me that all the time, and that's something that I appreciate, and I attribute that to having gone through the experiences that I have. Really, life's an adventure. I said that. You have to enjoy your ride. I mean, it's just like you're on a motorcycle, and I was a motorcycle policeman for a long time. You got to ride it like you stole it. You just go. But anyways, you had 6 stints.
Yes, I'm
that's
seeing
good.
a cardiologist on Wednesday, and I'm seeing a cardiac surgeon on Monday, because I still don't feel well. I believe I need a bypass, but we'll see. We'll see.
I'm going to pray for you, Lori.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Appreciate that. And I appreciate your answer. It's just amazing. Yeah, I blew my computer at work. I 2 key fobs wouldn't work. It's amazing, this stuff that happens to us. And you're like, wow, did that really just happen? So it's pretty amazing, the experience that we, go through afterwards as well. So thank you. Thank you again for sharing, Robert. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Lori.
Yeah. Lori, thanks for your question. And I'm so excited. Jack Lardis is here tonight. Jack, I want to wish you a happy birthday. That was on the 1st, I think. Or no, it's not. It's later in the month. But thank you so much for joining us. Tina and I co-facilitate the Connecticut IANDS, but lots of well wishes for your birthday, Jack. But for many years, Jack did as well. So Jack led the Connecticut IANDS group. So Jack, go ahead with your question. Thank you. Oh, we can't hear you, Jack. Can you unmute?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bethany. Robert, that was a wonderful information of what the NDE is about. I have a quick question. What was the message of Matthew 18:18?
Good question.
Has to do with, to my perception, has to do with protection. That's the perception I got. When you read it, read some things that follow it and explain it. And I think just about anybody can get their own personal message from it. But that's what I got out of it. And it's something that, in fact, I read it every day. I read that Matthew 18:18 every day, and just keeps me focused. So that's a great question, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Jack. I did put, I don't know all the different Bible versions here, but I have the King James version that I'm putting in the chat now. The first one was the ESV version, which I'm not quite sure what that is, but I am more familiar with the King James version. And it says, "Verily I say unto you, whatsoever ye shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever ye shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven."
Amen.
Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to pause our recording right now, but I just want to give a huge thank you to Robert Baer for taking the time to spend this evening with us to share your incredible story and your message of hope. And it's just been a profound evening for us. So I want to thank you so much, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, Bethany.